I was frightened because I had, in effect, been summoned into a royal presence. I was frightened for another reason, too. I knew the tension in me between love and power, between pain and rage, and the curious, the grinding way I remained extended between these poles, perpetually attempting to choose the better rather than the worse. But this choice was a choice in terms of a personal, a private better. I was, after all, a writer. What was its relevance in terms of a social worse? Here was the South Side, 1,000,000 in captivity, stretching from this doorstep as far as the eye could see. And they didn't even read. Depressed populations don't have the time or energy to spare. The affluent populations, which should have been their help, didn't, as far as could be discovered, read either. They merely bought books and devoured them, but not in order to learn, in order to learn new attitudes. Also, I knew that once I had entered the house, I couldn't smoke or drink, and I felt guilty about the cigarettes in my pocket, as I had felt years ago when my friend first took me into his church. I was half an hour late, having got lost on the way here, and I felt as deserving of a scolding as a schoolboy. The young man who came to the door, he was about 30, perhaps, with a handsome, smiling face, didn't seem to find my lateness offensive, and led me into a large room. On one side of the room sat 6 women, all in white. They were much occupied with a beautiful baby who seemed to belong to the youngest of the women. On the other side of the room sat 7 or 8 men, young, dressed in dark suits, very much at ease, and very imposing. The sunlight came into the room with the peacefulness one remembers from rooms in one's early childhood, a sunlight encountered later only in one's dreams. I remember being astounded by the quietness, the ease, the peace, the taste. I was introduced. They greeted me with a genuine cordiality and respect, and the respect increased my fright, for it meant that they expected something of me that I knew in my heart for their sakes I could not give. And we sat down. Elijah Muhammad was not in the room. Conversation was slow, but not as stiff as I had feared it would be. They kept it going, for I simply did not know which subjects I could acceptably bring up. They knew more about me and had read more of what I had written than I had expected, and I wondered what they made of it all, what they took my usefulness to be. The women were carrying on their own conversation in low tones. I gathered that they were not expected to take part in male conversations. A few women kept coming in and out of the room, apparently making preparations for dinner. We, the men, did not plunge deeply into any subject, for clearly we were all waiting for the appearance of Elijah. Presently, the men, one by one, left the room and returned. Then I was asked if I would like to wash, and I, too, walked down the hall to the bathroom. Shortly after I came back, we stood up, and Elijah entered. I do not know what I expected to see. I had read some of his speeches, and had heard fragments of others on the radio and on television, so I associated him with ferocity. But, no. The man who came into the room was small and slender, really very delicately put together, with a thin face, large warm eyes, and a most winning smile. Something came into the room with him, his disciples' joy at seeing him, his joy at seeing them. It was the kind of encounter one watches with a smile simply because it is so rare that people enjoy one another. He teased the women, like a father, with no hint of that ugly and unctuous flirtatiousness I knew so well from other churches, and they responded like that, with great freedom, and yet from a great and loving distance. He had seen me when he came into the room, I knew, though he had not looked my way. I had the feeling, as he talked and laughed with the others, whom I could only think of as his children, that he was sizing me up, deciding something. Now he turned toward me, to welcome me, with that marvelous smile, and carried me back nearly 24 years to that moment when the pastor had smiled at me and said, "Whose little boy are you?" I did not respond now as I had responded then, because there are some things, not many, alas, that one cannot do twice. But I knew what he made me feel, how I was drawn towards his peculiar authority, how his smile promised to take the burden of my life off my shoulders. Take your burdens to the Lord and leave them there. The central quality in Elijah's face is pain. and his smile is a witness to it. Pain so old and deep and black that it becomes personal and particular only when he smiles. One wonders what he would sound like if he could sing. He turned to me with that smile and said something like, "I've got a lot to say to you, but we'll wait until we sit down." And I laughed. He made me think of my father and me, as we might have been if we'd been friends. In the dining room there were two long tables. The men sat at one end and the women at the other. Elijah was at the head of our table, and I was seated at his left. I can scarcely remember what we ate, except that it was plentiful, sane, and simple. So sane and simple that it made me feel extremely decadent, and I think that I drank, therefore, 2 glasses of milk. Elijah mentioned having seen me on television, and said that it seemed to him that I was not yet brainwashed, and I was trying to become myself. He said this in a curiously unnerving way, his eyes looking into mine and one hand half hiding his lips, as though he were trying to conceal bad teeth. But his teeth were not bad. Then I remembered hearing that he had spent time in prison. I suppose that I would like to become myself, whatever that may mean, but I knew that Elijah's meaning and mine were not the same. I said yes, I was trying to be me, but I did not know how to say more than that, and so I waited. Whenever Elijah spoke, a kind of chorus arose from the table saying, "Yes, that's right." This began to set my teeth on edge. And Elijah himself had a further unnerving habit, which was to ricochet his questions and comments off someone else on their way to you. Now, turning to the man on his right, he began to speak of the white devils with whom I had last appeared on TV. What had they made him, me, feel? I could not answer this and was not absolutely certain that I was expected to. The people referred to had certainly made me feel exasperated and useless, but I did not think of them as devils. Elijah went on about the crimes of white people to this endless chorus of "yes, that's right." Someone at the table said, "The white man sure is a devil. He proves that by his own actions." I looked around. It was a very young man who had said this, scarcely more than a boy, very dark and sober, very bitter. Elijah began to speak of the Christian religion, of Christians, in the same soft, joking way. I began to see that Elijah's power came from his single-mindedness. There is nothing calculated about him. He means every word he says. The real reason, according to Elijah, that I failed to realize that the white man was a devil was that I had been too long exposed to white teaching and had never received true instruction. The so-called American Negro is the only reason Allah has permitted the United States to endure so long. The white man's time was up in 1913, but it is the will of Allah that this lost black nation, the black men of this country, be redeemed from their white masters and return to the true faith, which is Islam. Until this is done, and it will be accomplished very soon, the total destruction of the white man is being delayed. Elijah's mission is to return the so-called Negro to Islam, to separate the chosen of Allah from this doomed nation. Furthermore, the white man knows his history, knows himself to be a devil, and knows his time is running out, and all of his technology, psychology, science, and tricknology are being expended in the effort to prevent black men from hearing the truth. This truth is that at the very beginning of time, there was not one white face to be found in all the universe. Black men ruled the earth, and the black man was perfect. This is the truth concerning the era that white men now refer to as prehistoric. They want black men to believe that they, like white men, once lived in caves and swung from trees and ate their meat raw, and did not have the power of speech. But this is not true. Black men were never in such a condition. Allah allowed the devil, through his scientists, to carry on infernal experiments which resulted, finally, in the creation of the devil known as the white man, and later, even more disastrously, in the creation of the white woman. And it was decreed that these monstrous creatures should rule the earth for a certain number of years. I forget how many thousand, but in any case, their rule now is ending, and Allah, who had never approved of the creation of the white man in the first place, who knows him in fact to be not a man at all but a devil, is anxious to restore the rule of peace that the rise of the white man totally destroyed. There is thus, by definition, no virtue in white people. And since they are another creation entirely, and can no more by breeding become black than a cat by breeding can become a horse, there is no hope for them. There is nothing new in this merciless formulation except the explicitness of its symbols and the candor of its hatred. Its emotional tone is as familiar to me as my own skin. It is but another way of saying that sinners shall be bound in hell 1,000 years. That sinners have always, for American Negroes, been white is a truth we needn't labor, and every American Negro therefore risks having the gates of paranoia close on him. In a society that is entirely hostile and by its nature seems determined to cut you down, that has cut down so many in the past and cuts down so many every day, it begins to be almost impossible to distinguish a real from a fancied injury. One can very quickly cease to attempt this distinction, and what is worse, one usually ceases to attempt it without realizing that one has done so. All doormen, for example, and all policemen have by now, for me, become exactly the same, and my style with them is designed simply to intimidate them before they can intimidate me. No doubt I am guilty of some injustice here, but it is irreducible, since I cannot risk assuming that the humanity of these people is more real to them than their uniforms. Most Negroes cannot risk assuming that the humanity of white people is more real to them than their color. And this leads, imperceptibly but inevitably, to a state of mind in which, having long ago learned to expect the worst, one finds it very easy to believe the worst. The brutality with which Negroes are treated in this country simply cannot be overstated, however unwilling white men may be to hear it. In the beginning, and neither can this be overstated, a Negro just cannot believe that white people are treating him as they do. He does not know what he has done to merit it. And when he realizes that the treatment accorded him has nothing to do with anything he has done, that the attempt of white people to destroy him, for that is what it is utterly gratuitous, it is not hard for him to think of white people as devils. For the horrors of the American Negro's life there has been almost no language. The privacy of his experience, which is only beginning to be recognized in language, and which is denied or ignored in official and popular speech, hence the Negro idiom, lends credibility to any system that pretends to clarify it. And in fact, the truth about the black man, as a historical entity and as a human being, has been hidden from him, deliberately and cruelly. The power of the white world is threatened whenever a black man refuses to accept the white world's definitions. So every attempt is made to cut that black man down. Not only was made yesterday, but is made today. Who, then, is to say with authority where the root of so much anguish and evil lies? Why, then, is it not possible that all things began with the black man, and that he was perfect? Especially since this is precisely the claim that white people have put forward for themselves all these years. Furthermore, it is now absolutely clear that white people are a minority in the world, so severe a minority that they now look rather more like an invention, and that they cannot possibly hope to rule it any longer. If this is so, why is it not also possible that they achieved their original dominance by stealth and cunning and bloodshed, and in opposition to the will of heaven, and not, as they claim, by heaven's will? And if this is so, then the sword they have used so long against others can now, without mercy, be used against them. Heavenly witnesses are a tricky lot, to be used by whoever is closest to heaven at the time. And legend and theology, which are designed to sanctify our fears, crimes, and aspirations, also reveal them for what they are. I said at last, in answer to some other ricocheted questions, I left the church 20 years ago, and I haven't joined anything since. It was my way of saying that I did not intend to join their movement either. And what are you now? Elijah asked.